Hi, I'm Danny and these are my Diecast Disasters. In this video I'm going to be making another post-apocalyptic zombie-style gasoline tanker out of this Matchbox Super Kings Ford LTS articulated petrol tanker. These were produced from 1974 until about 1984. There was a few different versions of the Super Kings, and they did a Battle Kings version as well. I've also got the LTS tractor with some different trailers on it as well. It doesn't seem to be too uncommon a model to find, although most of the versions seem to have these quite ugly Speed King style wheels. Whilst there was one or two versions that they had the nice Super Kings wheels. We can take a look at it set up here. It's a decent sized model, a little bit smaller than the Peterbilt truck. This one used to have the shell stickers on the doors and on the tank, but they are long worn away. So let's take a closer look at it. First, the tractor, heavily play worn, the paint is fairly worn away. One of the rear wheel arches is dented there. Quite a cool model in that the bonnet opens here. There's a little latch on the side that you have to push. And the trailer is similarly worn. You can see there's a unit broken off the front there. There's also something broken off the back here. Still got a shell sticker remaining there though. But ultimately none of this is going to matter with what we're going to be doing to it. So let's crack on with it. You might want to grab a drink and a snack, as this is a reasonably long one. I start by drilling out the posts and taking the truck apart. Again with the back wheels there. Now to holding the cab on. Horrible green windscreen. Don't know why they did that. The truck has quite a nice interior. There's a couple of plastic rivets here holding the grille in. I just carefully drill those out. So there's the cab apart. Now I can move on and take the trailer apart. So Matchbox have been quite sneaky here and hidden away the rivets holding the trailer together. But it's okay because I know where they are. Just use my tool here to prise the top off. And there are our rivets tucked away inside. Now I must say I found this base heat piece here quite interesting, as I've spent a little bit of time making molds and this has so many odd undercuts on it. I can only imagine this was a 4-part mold. Here are the cast parts with some paint stripper, and here they are with the paint mostly removed. I use the wire brush and my rotary tool to clean them up, removing the oxidation and the remaining scraps of paint. Removing the paint isn't so important in these post-apocalyptic builds. And here they are after burnishing. The rear wheel guard here is a bit bent in. This is a really common piece of damage with these models. I just use my plier to carefully bend it back out and then straighten it up. I start modifying the cab with some armor. I use some aluminium sheet to make some armor sheets for the doors, and I just use my little nail here to bang some rivets into them. Once I've made them and trimmed them to size, I stick them on with a little bit of my Starbond super glue here. I'm going to have a few spikes on this truck, so to make the fatter spikes I'm going to use this styrene rod here. I just use my craft knife to trim it into spikes of different lengths. going to put some shorter spikes here on the bonnet. And here we can see I've got another base. Note the similarly damaged rear wheel wells. Anyway, I wanted my truck to have 6 wheels instead of 4, so I've cut off the rear of the other base and glued it on to my one that I'm using. Now I use some epoxy putty to filler it, and this will also set really hard and strengthen it quite a bit. And here's my extended chassis for my truck. Also, now that it's longer, I can put the rear end of this little taxi on. Just before I do that, I'm going to put my wheels in and test them. I've got these truck wheels to go on the front and the first rear set, and then I've got some big monster wheels to go on the rear. I've modified the chassis underneath to fit these wheels using some steel sheet, some epoxy putty and some aluminium tubing. I use a coping saw to cut the rear off of the taxi, stuck the seat back in and put some mesh windows in there. I paint the interior black because I'm not going to be able to get to it again. And now I can glue it onto the rear of my truck cab. Again, I'm using the Starbond super glue here. It's really awesome stuff, and it has an accelerator which I can spray on, which sets the glue just about instantly. This really helps when I'm positioning stuff, because as soon as I get it right, I can set it in place. You'll find a link to get the Starbond glue down in the description, and if you use the code DANNY10 you'll get a 10% discount. So here is the rear of my taxi stuck onto the back of the cab. I've got this big tank here I'm going to attach behind it. Here are some doors from the taxi. I'm going to stick these on the side there as they fit quite well. There, that's looking really cool as the slopes on the doors fit over the wheel arches well. I've got these larger exhaust stacks harvested from a Peterbilt. I attach those to the sides here. I'll also glue my tank here in place. And here is the cab after a bit more work. I've chained the bonnet down. I've put some big hoses going from the engine to the tank, and I also chained the tank on. I'm going to make some longer, thinner spikes out of these nails here. I just cut the button heads off them first. Next I use the sanding wheel on my rotary tool to make them look all rough and hand beaten. Making lots of these little things takes quite a while, so you just have to zen out and be a bit patient. I dipped the base of some of them in some army and putty just to make a blob, like some welding. I can stick the grill back in now. I've added plenty more spikes to the top of the cab there. I've also made some little covers for the exhaust stacks. Here is a pilot and some big spikes for the front of the truck. These are attached to the base there. You can see the hose going along the side of the truck to the petrol tank. You can see the little rain caps a bit better there. Now moving on to fabricating the trailer. I'll start by scraping off these old stickers. I then use some ISO to get rid of the leftover glue. It's looking a bit cleaner. Now I can glue the trailer back together. It originally had these fairly ugly Speed Kings wheels. I'm going to replace them with these slightly bigger ones. They've also got some grip on them. I'm going to put some cars on the back here for armor. Start with a couple of charges there. I use a bit of masking tape to hold them in place while I glue on some styrene framing. Now I'm going to use the top off of this tank here. I'll chain it down with some chains. This was a fastback Mustang. I've chopped that up for some armor on the front of the tank. Also added these ladders here. And so here are all of the parts fabricated and ready for painting. Here's the rear armor section. I've put another car on the back of that. Here's the chassis of the tractor and the cab. And finally the tanker trailer. I've added some spikes to it there on the sides at the front. So now I'm going to give them their first coat of primer. I painted the cab here black and all of the other sections in silver. So I'll start painting the cab here. I'm going to begin with a rusty effect all over the taxi rear that's been attacked. I start with a dark brown. Once this is dried, I add a lighter rust effect paint. I sort of use a stippling effect to add it roughly all over. Next, I mask off the rest of the cab as best as I can. I brush on some water and then I tip over a fair amount of salt. This will give a nice chipping effect when I paint it. I let this dry for a little while and then I painted it blue. Now I can take off my masking and brush away the salt. This will chip the paint, revealing the rusty effect underneath. Next I paint the tank in a copper colour. Here it is after a couple of coats. Now I can start adding some detail to the spikes and the chains and armour. I'm using a dark steel colour. If you make a little mistake, you can always use a damp brush to remove it. So there's the armor and the spikes and chains detailed. Next I paint the stack silver and paint that hose red. Now time to start adding some black wash over all of the silver areas. Once my black wash had dried, I start adding some rust. I'm using some ground up pastels and umbral weathering powders here, dissolved in a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. Just paint this on where I want the rust to be. As the alcohol dries away, it leaves behind the rusty looking powder. Once this had dried, I went back over with some more dark wash. And finally, I'll finish it off with some metallic weathering powders. I'm using some gunmetal, some silver, and some metallic blue. I use the old horrible green windscreen to cut out a template for a new front windscreen out of this clear styrene here. So with the cab done, I can move on to the chassis. First of all, I mask off the wheel wells, paint them black. I paint the pilot and the spikes in the dark silver. Next, I apply a black wash over the whole thing. I add some weathering powders. I fixed this with a matte varnish before I moved on and started to add some rust. I use an airbrush to apply a rust effect all over the rear armour section. I mask off the two charges on the side and apply some salt to them. These are painted black, and then I remove the masking and brush away the salt. Next, I mask off the tank on top and apply the salt to that. This was painted in an olive green. And finally, the Mustang at the rear was painted red. Next, I detail the chains in some steel. I also paint on some more rust over the steel beams. And then I add a dark wash over the whole lot. I give the chains and framing a little bit of highlighting with some metallic weathering powder. For the trailer, I begin by masking off the front car. This was given a rust paint job and then some salt chipping, and it was painted black. Next I detail the spikes and the ladder and the bottom of the trailer in some dark steel. I've also done the top of it there. Now for some dark wash over the whole thing. And some rust. And here it is after the rust and a little bit more dark wash has been applied. Now I'm going to bring out the highlights with some weathering powders. Here is the interior for the cab and the engine. I've detailed it there. You're not really going to see the engine as you can't open the bonnet anymore. Here are the wheels I'm going to use. Here's the big monster style ones. The Super Kings large grippy wheels. And these wheels I harvested off of another toy truck. So I'm going to have to make them all look a bit more post-apocalyptic. So I paint them steel. I then give them some rust and washes. And here is how they're looking now. I've also put some dust weathering powders on the tyres and then fixed it all with a matte varnish. And so after all of that, here are the parts of our truck all fabricated and painted and ready to go together. I've made all these little skulls to go on the trailer as well. And I've also made some little flags here. These are made out of modeling clay and then just baked in the oven. So before we take a look at our finished post-apocalyptic zombie gasoline tanker, let's just take a moment to look back and be reminded of what we started with. Our Ford LTS shell tanker is looking fairly worn out. Paint's all wearing away and it's missing all its stickers. Some bits are broken off. So let's salvage it for our post-apocalyptic world. And here is the finished tractor, seriously beefed up with some extra wheels at the back, plenty of armor, and extra half car cabs stuck on the back. It's got spikes, chains, and that big mean pilot at the front to plow things out of the way. Unfortunately, the trailer is too heavy for my little turntable here. And here it is, the whole finished truck. Got that mean armoured tanker trailer on the back there. Armoured with a selection of old American cars and a tank up the top there for maybe lobbing some shells off into the distance. It's got a few spikes, some of them sporting some flags, and they've stuck the skulls of their victims all over it. I'm really happy with how this build came out. I hope you enjoy it too. You can let me know what you think in the comments below. Now say a big welcome to all of my new subscribers and a massive thanks to all of my viewers for watching the videos and commenting and giving them a thumbs up. As always, an extra special thanks to my awesome Patreon supporters. If you'd like to join them supporting the channel, you can check out my Patreon page. There's a link in the description below, as well as a link to the Starbond glue where you can get 10% off with the code Danny10. Thanks heaps for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and share it with your friends.